Commander Jake Morrison watched the screens on his ship's bridge and felt his heart sink. The last human colony in the Centauri sector was dying. Dark shapes moved across the planet's surface like spreading ink, and where they touched, all light disappeared. The colony of New Haven had over 2 million people just yesterday. Now the sensors showed nothing but empty darkness. "Sir, we're receiving the final transmission from the surface," said Lieutenant Amy Carter, her voice shaking. Jake nodded and listened to the crackling message. The voice belonged to Colonel Mary Stone, the colony's military commander. "This is New Haven base to all ships. The shadows are at our walls. We can't stop them. Whatever these things are, they don't just kill, they take everything. Hope, dreams, even memories of better times. Tell Earth to run. Tell them to hide. These things hunt what makes us human." The transmission ended with screams that turned to silence. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to face his crew. This was the 15th colony they had lost in 3 months. The pattern was always the same. Strange dark entities would appear at the edge of a system, moving like living shadows through space. They consumed everything that made worlds beautiful and alive, leaving behind dead rocks wrapped in permanent darkness. Captain Lisa Wright stood beside Jake's command chair, studying the tactical display. Her ship, the UES Freedom, had arrived too late to help, just like all the other times. "Admiral Kane is ordering all remaining colonies to evacuate," she said quietly. "Earth's calling everyone back to the inner systems." Jake knew what that meant. Humanity was giving up on the stars. After 200 years of spreading across the galaxy, meeting new alien friends, and building a better future among distant suns, they were running home with their tails between their legs. The thought made him angry, but anger wouldn't bring back the dead colonies or stop whatever was hunting them. Dr. Alina Rodriguez walked onto the bridge carrying a datapad. She was the fleet's expert on alien life, and she had been studying every piece of information about these shadow creatures. "I've been looking at the attack patterns," she said. "These things aren't random. They're choosing their targets very carefully." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Alina pulled up a star map showing all the lost colonies. "Look at this. They hit the art colonies first. New Canvas, where the painters lived. Harmony Station, where musicians from 12 different worlds worked together. The Storyteller Settlement on Kepler 7. They're targeting places where humans create things." Lisa frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Why would aliens care about our art?" "I don't know yet," Alina admitted. "But there's something else. I've been talking to survivors from the early attacks. They all say the same thing. When these shadow creatures see human art, they stop for a few seconds. Paintings, music, even children's drawings seem to confuse them." Jake thought about this. He remembered his daughter's artwork stuck to the refrigerator. Back on Earth, simple pictures of stick figures holding hands under yellow suns. Could something so innocent really affect cosmic horrors that devoured entire worlds? Lieutenant Ryan Bell, the ship's tactical officer, looked up from his station. "Sir, we're getting reports from the outer colonies. The aliens we've been friends with, the Crystal People and the Hive Minds, they're all pulling back to their home systems, building walls, giving up huge parts of the galaxy." Jake wasn't surprised. The Zephyrians and the Collective were smart species, but they thought differently than humans. When faced with an impossible enemy, they calculated losses and made logical decisions. Humans, on the other hand, had a tendency to do stupid, hopeful things even when the odds were terrible. "What about Earth?" Jake asked. "Refugee ships are arriving every day," Ryan reported. "Millions of people coming home. The government is talking about building defense stations around the solar system and waiting to see what happens." Jake stood up and walked to the main view screen. Outside, stars twinkled in the darkness, but he knew that somewhere out there, shadows were moving between them, swallowing light and hope. In a few months, maybe a year, those shadows would reach Earth. Then humanity's long adventure among the stars would end in darkness. But something bothered him about Elena's discovery. If these creatures were confused by human art, why, what was special about a painting or a song that could make cosmic horrors pause? Jake had spent his whole career fighting with lasers and missiles. But maybe the answer to humanity's greatest threat wasn't in their weapons. Maybe it was in their paintbrushes. The fleet prepared to jump back toward Earth. Jake made a decision. He would talk to Admiral Kane about Elena's findings. Someone needed to understand why creatures that could devour starlight itself would hesitate when faced with a child's drawing. Because if there was even a small chance that human creativity could be turned into a weapon against the darkness, they had to try. The alternative was watching everything they had built disappear into shadows that never ended. 3 months had passed since New Haven fell to the shadows. Admiral Peter Kane stood in the war room at Earth's orbital command station, looking at a map that showed too much red. Each red dot represented a lost world, a place where humans had once lived and dreamed and built something beautiful. Now there were more red dots than blue ones. At current speed they'll reach the outer defense line in 18 months, said General Patricia Stone, pointing at the advancing darkness on the tactical display. Earth has maybe 2 years before they arrive here. The room was full of Earth's best military minds, but Jake Morrison could see the defeat in their eyes. They were planning the biggest retreat in human history, pulling back from a galaxy they had spent centuries exploring. Some talked about hiding in deep space. Others wanted to build underground cities and wait for the darkness to pass. Everyone had given up on fighting, everyone except Jake. I want to propose something different, he said, standing up from his chair. The room fell quiet. Dr. Rodriguez has been studying these creatures for months. She's found something important. Admiral Kane sighed. Commander Morrison, we've been over this. Whatever these things are, they're too powerful for our weapons. We've tried everything. Not everything, Jake replied. We've tried missiles and lasers and particle beams. We haven't tried art. Several officers laughed, but Elena Rodriguez stepped forward with her research files. He's right. I've documented over 40 encounters where these shadow entities stopped or retreated when exposed to human creative works. Music makes them hesitate. Paintings cause confusion. Poetry actually seems to hurt them. That's impossible, said General Stone. How can a painting hurt something that eats planets? Elena connected her datapad to the main display. Images appeared showing brain scans of captured shadow creatures. These beings operate on frequencies that match despair and destruction. Human creativity operates on the exact opposite wavelength. When they encounter our art, it's like a virus in their system. Jake pointed to a video recording from the last evacuation of Harmony Station. Watch this. A group of children were trapped in the art wing of the school. The shadows came right up to the walls covered in finger paintings and stopped. They couldn't enter that room. The video showed dark entities flowing like liquid death through the corridors. But when they reached the colorful walls of the children's classroom, they recoiled as if burned. The kids were rescued because their artwork had created a safe zone in the middle of hell. You're talking about weaponizing finger painting, General Stone said. This is insane. Maybe, Jake admitted. But insane is what humans do best. Every other species in the galaxy has given up and run away. The crystal people are hiding behind energy barriers. The hive minds have sealed their borders. But we're still here, still fighting, because we're too stupid to quit. Admiral Kane studied the data for a long moment. Even if this works, how do you weaponize art? Do we load paintbrushes into torpedo tubes? We create a new kind of military unit, Jake said. Artists who are also soldiers, painters who can fight, musicians who understand tactics. We teach them to use creativity as a weapon and deploy them against the shadows. Alina nodded enthusiastically. I've been working with some volunteers. Maya Chen, she's an artist who survived the fall of New Canvas. She's been training with combat units and developing techniques for battlefield art creation. Battlefield art creation, repeated General Stone. I never thought I'd hear those words in a military briefing. Captain Lisa Wright, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. My ship was at Proxima Station last week for supply runs. We found something interesting in the ruins. There's a section of the colony that the shadows left completely untouched. A small art gallery where a kid named Ben Foster had painted a picture of Earth's sunrise. The shadow creatures won't go within 50 meters of that painting. This got everyone's attention. A painting that could create a safe zone in enemy territory was worth more than a dozen. Battleships. Jake pressed his advantage. We're not talking about replacing our regular military. We're talking about adding a new capability. If Dr. Rodriguez is right, human creativity is the only thing in the galaxy that can actually hurt these creatures. Admiral Kane walked over to the star map and stared at all the red dots. How long would it take to train these artist soldiers? Maya Chen's group has been working for 2 months already, Alina said. They've developed basic techniques for rapid art deployment, combat painting, and what they call aggressive creativity. Give us 6 more months and we could have the first units ready for field testing. Field testing against creatures that devour hope itself, General Stone muttered. This plan gets crazier every minute. Jake looked around the room at faces full of doubt and fear. Maybe it is crazy, but everything else we've tried has failed. Our weapons can't touch them. Our shields can't stop them. Running away just delays the inevitable. At least this gives us a chance to fight back. And if you're wrong, asked Admiral Kane, then we die like everyone else, Jake said simply. But if we're right, if human creativity really can hurt these things, then we have a weapon no one else in the galaxy possesses. We have hope. The room was silent for a long moment. Outside the station's windows, Earth turned slowly in the darkness, blue and green and beautiful. Soon refugee ships would start arriving from the inner colonies as the shadows advanced. Millions of people coming home because there was nowhere else to run. Admiral Kane made his decision. You have your 6 months, Commander Morrison. Train your artist soldiers, build your creativity cores. But understand this, if this fails, there won't be time for another experiment. This is humanity's last chance. Jake nodded. I understand, sir. We won't let you down. As the meeting broke up, Alina walked over to Jake. Do you really think we can turn art into a weapon powerful enough to save the galaxy? Jake looked out at the stars and thought about all the beautiful things humans had created among them. Colonies that were works of art themselves. Music that could make aliens cry. Stories that bridged the gap between different species and different worlds. I think, he said, that we're about to find out what humans are really capable of when we paint with hope instead of fear. Maya Chen stood in front of 30 volunteers in the converted cargo bay that had become humanity's first combat arts training center. Half of them were artists who had never held anything more dangerous than a paintbrush. The other half were soldiers who thought art was something you hung on walls. Maya's job was to turn them into something the galaxy had never seen before. Forget everything you know about art and war, she told them. We're not painting pretty pictures and we're not shooting guns. We're learning to weaponize hope itself. Private Danny Wright, a young soldier whose sister was Captain Lisa Wright, raised his hand. Ma'am, how exactly do you weaponize a painting? Maya smiled and walked over to a blank wall. She pulled out a spray can and began painting rapidly. Within minutes, she had created a swirling image of Earth's sunrise bursting through dark clouds. The moment she finished, the temperature in the room seemed to rise and everyone felt a little more optimistic. Art affects emotions, Maya explained. Good art makes you feel something. Combat art makes the enemy feel something they can't handle. Dr. Rodriguez has proven that these shadow creatures feed on despair and destruction. When they encounter human creativity, especially art that expresses hope and joy, it's like poison to them. Alina Rodriguez entered the training bay carrying equipment that looked like nothing anyone had seen before. Paint dispensers that could be mounted on battle armor, musical instruments designed to survive combat conditions, portable holographic projectors that could display artwork in 3 dimensions. The engineering teams have been busy, Alina announced. We've developed rapid deployment art systems, combat-grade creativity tools, and defensive painting protocols. You're going to learn to use all of them. For the next 6 months, the volunteers trained harder than any military unit in human history. They learned to paint while under fire, to compose music that could break enemy formations, and to create sculptures that served as defensive barriers. They studied the psychology of hope and the tactical applications of beauty. Jake Morrison watched their progress from the observation deck. What he saw amazed him. Artists learned to think like soldiers, planning their creative attacks with military precision. Soldiers discovered that making something beautiful required courage and discipline just like combat did. Both groups were becoming something new. They're ready, Maya reported after a particularly intense training session. Not perfect, but ready. The question is whether we'll get a chance to test their abilities. Jake didn't have to wait long for an answer. Admiral Kane called him to the command center with urgent news. Long-range sensors had detected shadow entities approaching the mining world of Kepler-4 for 2b. It was a small colony with only 50,000 people, but it was humanity's first chance to test their new weapon. You have 12 ships and your combat artists, Admiral Kane told Jake. If this works, we'll know we have a real chance. If it doesn't work, try to get our people out alive. The fleet that jumped to Kepler-4 to be looked nothing like a traditional battle group. Alongside the military vessels were converted civilian ships loaded with art supplies, mobile painting studios, and concert equipment. The crew included not just soldiers and pilots, but painters, musicians, poets, and dancers. Captain Lisa Wright commanded one of the escort ships, and she couldn't help but smile when she saw her brother Danny painting camouflage patterns on his fighter that looked more like abstract art than military colors. This is either the smartest plan in human history or the dumbest, she said to her first officer. When they arrived at Kepler-4 for 2b, the shadow entities were already there. Dark shapes moved between the moons like living nightmares, testing the colony's defenses. The civilian population was huddled in underground shelters, while the local militia tried desperately to hold the surface installations. All units, this is Morrison, Jake announced over the fleet communications. Execute Operation Painted Dawn. Artists to battle stations. What happened next was unlike any battle in the history of warfare. As shadow creatures poured toward human fleets like a wave of living darkness, the response was not missiles and energy beams, but music and light and color. Lieutenant Sarah Parker, a composer who had trained as a tactical officer, broadcast a symphony she had written specifically to hurt shadow entities. The music incorporated mathematical patterns of hope and joy, frequencies that Dr. Rodriguez had identified as harmful to the creatures. As the symphony played across all communication channels, the advancing shadows began to slow and waver. Pilots like Danny Wright engaged the enemy with weapons that fired paint instead of bullets. Their ships trailed ribbons of color through space, creating abstract masterpieces that confused and repelled the shadow creatures. Where the painted trails intersected, the darkness simply couldn't exist. Maya Chen led a boarding party onto the colony's main station, but instead of carrying guns, they carried art supplies. As shadow creatures tried to penetrate the colony's defenses, Maya's team painted defensive murals on the walls. Each brushstroke seemed to push the darkness back a little further. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the battle from the command ship, watching sensors that showed something impossible. The shadow entities weren't just confused or hesitant, they were actually taking damage from the human artistic assault. Their energy readings were dropping and their formations were breaking apart. It's working, she reported to Jake with amazement in her voice. The combination of music, visual art, and coordinated creativity is overwhelming their systems. They can't process this much concentrated hope. The battle lasted 6 hours, but it felt like minutes to the combat artists who were lost in the flow of creative combat. They painted and sang and danced their way through hell, turning a war zone into the largest collaborative artwork in human history. When the last shadow creature retreated beyond the edge of the star system, the fleet surveyed what they had accomplished. Kepler 442b was not just saved, it was transformed. The entire colony was now covered in murals visible from orbit. The moons had been painted with symbols of hope that would be seen for generations. Space itself seemed brighter. Admiral Kane, this is Commander Morrison, Jake reported to Earth. Operation Painted Dawn is a complete success. The shadow entities have withdrawn from the system and the colony is secure. Recommend immediate expansion of the combat arts program. Back on Earth, Admiral Kane looked at the battle recordings. With wonder, humanity had found their weapon against the darkness, and it was the most human thing imaginable. The ability to create beauty and hope in the face of cosmic horror. Commander Morrison, he replied, you have authorization to recruit every artist on Earth. We're going to need them all. 6 months after the victory at Kepler 442b, the galaxy watched in amazement as humanity began painting hope across the stars. 17 star systems had been liberated using artistic warfare, and each one became a gallery of human creativity that the shadow creatures couldn't approach. Admiral Kane stood in the expanded war room on Earth's orbital station, looking at a tactical display that now showed more blue dots than red ones for the first time in over a year. The combat arts program had grown from 30 volunteers to over 10,000 artist soldiers stationed throughout human space. The Zephyrians want to send observers, reported General Stone, who had become one of the program's strongest supporters after seeing the battle recordings. They're calling our methods revolutionary. The collective has asked for detailed reports on our artistic warfare techniques. Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral, smiled at the irony. For centuries, humanity had been the junior species in galactic politics, learning from older and wiser aliens. Now those same aliens were asking to learn from human creativity. What about the shadow entities? Jake asked. Are they adapting? Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now director of the Artistic Warfare Research Division, pulled up new sensor data. They're trying to. We've encountered shadow creatures that can partially resist our artistic influence. They're evolving faster than we expected. This was the challenge that kept Jake awake at night. The shadows weren't just mindless destroyers. They learned from each encounter, developing resistances to human creativity. The war was becoming an arms race between human imagination and alien adaptation. We need to evolve too, said Maya Chen, who now commanded the 1st Combat Arts Brigade. Single art forms aren't enough anymore. We need combinations, layers. symphonies of creativity that overwhelm their adaptive capabilities. The solution came from an unexpected source. Danny Wright, now a squadron leader in the Artist Fighter Corps, suggested something during a strategy meeting that changed everything. What if we combine all art forms simultaneously, not just music or painting or dance, but everything working together? Maya understood immediately. A total artistic assault. Every creative discipline coordinated into a single, overwhelming expression of human hope and imagination. The concept was tested at the Battle of Wolf 359, where shadow forces had massed for what intelligence suggested would be a major push toward Earth. The human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 30 ships moved in perfect, choreographed formation while broadcasting a symphony composed by teams of musicians working together. The ships themselves became paintbrushes, trailing multicolored plasma that created massive artworks spanning thousands of kilometers. Fighter squadrons danced through space in patterns that were both tactically sound and aesthetically beautiful. Captain Lisa Wright commanded the flagship of the artistic fleet, watching as her crew worked with an intensity she had never seen before. Musicians, painters, dancers, and poets worked side by side with engineers and tactical officers, creating something that was both art and weapon. The shadows are trying to adapt, reported the sensor operator, but they can't keep up with the complexity. Every time they adjust to the music, we change the visual patterns. When they compensate for the paintings, we shift the dance formations. Dr. Rodriguez watched from the science station as her instruments recorded something unprecedented. The shadow creatures weren't just retreating, they were showing signs of fundamental system breakdown, as if the coordinated human creativity was causing them actual psychological damage. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations in their formations," she announced. "It's like they're having panic attacks. The combined artistic assault is triggering some kind of trauma response." This observation led to Elena's next breakthrough. Working with captured shadow entities in her laboratory, she discovered something that changed humanity's understanding of the entire conflict. The creatures weren't just random cosmic parasites. They were the traumatized remnants of a species that had once been artists themselves. "Look at these neural patterns," she explained to Jake during a private briefing. "Deep underneath all the darkness and despair, there are traces of creative consciousness. These beings once made beautiful things. Something happened to them, something so terrible that it destroyed their ability to create and left them only able to consume the creativity of others." Jake stared at the data, trying to process the implications. "You're saying we're not fighting invaders, we're fighting victims. Victims who became monsters," Elena confirmed. "They consume hope and beauty because they can't make it anymore. When they encounter human art, it reminds them of what they lost, and that reminder is psychologically devastating." This revelation created a crisis within the human leadership. Some commanders, including General Stone, argued that the shadow creatures' tragic origin didn't matter. They were still destroying worlds and killing innocent people. The war had to continue until they were eliminated, but Maya Chen and her combat artists began experimenting with a different approach. Instead of using art purely as a weapon, they started creating works specifically designed to communicate with the shadow entities. Empathy paintings that expressed understanding rather than aggression. Music that offered healing instead of harm. "We're not just fighting them anymore," Maya explained to Jake during a visit to her brigade's new base. "We're trying to reach the part of them that remembers what it was like to create instead of destroy." The first successful contact came during the liberation of Tau Ceti, as Maya's team painted a defensive mural around the colony's main habitat. Something unexpected happened. A shadow creature approached the artwork but didn't attack. Instead, it began manipulating space debris and stellar matter, creating its own crude but recognizable artistic pattern. "It's trying to communicate," Elena said in amazement as she watched the recordings. "The art triggered some kind of memory, and it's attempting to create something itself." The breakthrough led to the development of what the combat artists called universal empathy patterns. These were artistic expressions designed to bridge the gap between species, even species as damaged as the shadow entities. The goal wasn't to destroy the creatures but to remind them of who they used to be. Amy Wright, Captain Wright's daughter who had joined the combat arts program as a xenopsychology specialist, worked with teams of artists to create these empathy patterns. "We're basically doing art therapy on a galactic scale," she explained, "trying to heal a wound in the universe itself." The approach wasn't universally popular. Many humans who had lost family and friends to the shadow attacks wanted revenge, not reconciliation. They argued that showing mercy to creatures that had devoured entire worlds was naive and dangerous, but Jake had seen too much to ignore the possibility. If there was even a chance that the shadows could be healed instead of destroyed, humanity had to try. It was what made them human, the stubborn refusal to accept that anyone, even cosmic horrors, was beyond redemption. "We're going to need more artists," he told Admiral Kane during their weekly strategy meeting, "not just for weapons, but for healing. If we're going to save the galaxy, we need to paint hope into the hearts of our enemies." Kane looked at the star maps showing liberated worlds glowing with human art. "How many more?" "All of them," Jake replied. "Every artist on Earth and every colony. We're not just fighting a war anymore, we're healing the universe, one brushstroke at a time." The war reached its turning point when humanity discovered the location of the shadow entity's source. Deep in the Andromeda spiral, long-range sensors detected an anomaly that spanned an entire solar system. It wasn't just another shadow concentration, it was the core consciousness that controlled all the smaller entities across the galaxy. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room aboard the UES Hope, humanity's newest and most advanced artistic warfare vessel. Around him sat representatives from three species: humans, the crystalline Zephyrians, and the hive-minded collective. For the first time since the Shadow War began, the galaxy's major powers were working together. "The entity is massive beyond our previous understanding," reported Dr. Alina Rodriguez, projecting holographic images of the Shadow Core. "It's not just using the star system as a base, it has become the star system. Planets, moons, asteroids, even the star itself have been converted into components of a single massive consciousness." Zarketh, the Zephyrian observer, resonated with crystalline harmonics that translated as amazement. "Your species' artistic warfare has impressed the Crystal Councils. We offer our light-weaving technologies to amplify your creative expressions across greater distances." The collective delegate, speaking through dozens of synchronized voices, added their contribution. "The Unity provides coordination algorithms. Individual artistic efforts can be merged into collective expressions of unprecedented complexity." Maya Chen, now a general commanding the combined arts fleet, studied the tactical projections. "This isn't going to be a battle in any traditional sense. The core consciousness isn't just an enemy to defeat. Based on Elena's research, it's a patient that needs healing on a scale we've never attempted." Amy Wright, who had become humanity's leading expert in xenopsychological art therapy, presented her analysis of the Shadow Core. "The entity shows signs of massive psychological trauma dating back millions of years. Whatever happened to these beings originally, it was so devastating that it destroyed their entire species' ability to create. They've been consuming the creativity of others ever since, trying to fill a void that can never be filled through destruction." Jake looked at the assembled team and felt the weight of what they were attempting. This wasn't just humanity's greatest military operation, it was potentially the largest therapeutic intervention in galactic history, conducted across the void of space with entire star systems as the treatment room. "How do we approach something that large?" asked Captain Lisa Wright, who commanded one of the escort vessels in the artistic fleet. Alina activated another projection showing the fleet composition. "We've assembled everything we have. 50 ships from the combat arts fleet, each one equipped with advanced creativity deployment systems. Artists from every human colony and refugee settlement, musicians, painters, dancers, poets, sculptors, and digital artists working in coordination, plus our new allies," added Maya, gesturing to the alien representatives, Zephyrian Lightweaver, who can preserve artistic expressions across interstellar distances. Collective coordination specialists who can merge millions of individual creative efforts into unified statements. The mission plan was unlike anything in military history. Instead of approaching with weapons ready, the combined fleet would advance, while creating the largest collaborative artwork ever attempted. Every ship would contribute to a massive artistic expression designed not to destroy the Shadow Core but to remind it of what it had lost. Amy had worked with teams of xenopsychologists and artists to develop what they called universal healing patterns. These were artistic expressions that transcended species boundaries, communicating concepts of hope, recovery, and redemption in languages that any conscious being could understand. "We'll start with simple patterns," Amy explained. "Basic expressions of light and harmony that even a traumatized consciousness can process without feeling threatened. Then we'll gradually introduce more complex themes: healing, forgiveness, the possibility of creating instead of consuming." Danny Wright, now a colonel commanding the fighter squadrons, raised a concern that many were thinking, What if it doesn't work? What if the core consciousness is too far gone for healing? We'll be defenseless out there. Jake had considered this possibility extensively. If the healing approach fails, we fall back to pure artistic warfare. Everything we've learned about using creativity as a weapon concentrated into the most powerful artistic assault in galactic history. But I don't think it will come to that. Why not? Asked General Stone, attending the briefing via hologram from Earth. Because, Jake replied, every shadow entity we've encountered has shown some response to human art. Even the most corrupted ones have that spark of their original creative nature buried deep inside. The core consciousness is just a larger version of the same damaged beings. Somewhere in that massive entity is the memory of what it was like to make beautiful things instead of destroying them. The journey to the Andromeda Spiral took 3 weeks, during which the fleet's artists worked continuously to prepare their materials. Musicians composed symphonies designed to resonate with alien psychology. Painters created works that expressed universal concepts of hope and healing. Dancers choreographed movements that could be performed by ships moving through space. Dr. Rodriguez spent the trip studying every piece of data about shadow entity psychology, fine-tuning the artistic patterns to maximize their therapeutic impact. We get one chance at this, she told Jake during one of their planning sessions. If we trigger a negative response from something that large, it could destroy the entire fleet in minutes. As they approached the shadow core system, the magnitude of what they faced became clear. The entity wasn't just occupying the solar system, it had fundamentally altered the laws of physics in the region. Space itself seemed darker, as if light had trouble existing in the presence of such concentrated despair. Beginning artistic approach, pattern, announced Maya over the fleet communications. All units, remember your training. We're not attacking an enemy, we're reaching out to a patient who has been suffering for millions of years. The first phase involved the Zephyrian Lightweavers creating a framework of pure crystalline harmony that could carry artistic expressions across the vast distances involved. The collective provided coordination algorithms that allowed thousands of individual artists to work as a single creative consciousness. Then humanity began to paint hope across the darkness of space itself. Ships moved in graceful formations while broadcasting music that incorporated mathematical patterns of healing and recovery. Fighter squadrons danced through the void, trailing colors that had never been seen in that dark region of space. The combined fleet became a single massive artwork expressing one simple message: you are not alone. You can heal. You can create again. The Shadow Core's response was immediate and terrifying. The entity that spanned a solar system convulsed, with what could only be described as cosmic agony. For a moment, Jake thought their approach had failed catastrophically. The core was going to lash out and destroy them all. But then something unprecedented happened. The shadow entity began to respond with its own artistic expressions, manipulating stellar matter and gravitational fields to create crude but recognizable patterns. It was trying to remember how to make something beautiful instead of destructive. The healing of the shadow core took not hours or days, but weeks. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Hope as the largest art therapy session in galactic history unfolded across an entire star system. What had once been a region of pure darkness was slowly filling with light as the ancient entity remembered how to create instead of consume. Amy Wright worked around the clock with her xenopsychology team, interpreting the core consciousness's attempts at artistic expression. The entity was like a patient recovering from millions of years of trauma, slowly relearning abilities it had thought were lost forever. Its first efforts were crude manipulations of space debris, but gradually they became more sophisticated. It's working, Dr. Alina Rodriguez reported during one of the daily briefings. The entity's energy patterns are shifting from destructive resonance to creative harmony. The smaller shadow creatures throughout the galaxy are responding to the change. Many are reverting to their original forms. Maya Chen coordinated the human artistic response from her command ship, working with Zephyrian Lightweavers and collective coordination. Specialists to maintain the massive therapeutic artwork that surrounded the healing entity. Every day brought new challenges as they adjusted their creative expressions to match the core consciousness's evolving psychological state. Today it tried to create music, Amy announced with excitement in her voice, using gravitational waves between planets as sound frequencies. It's primitive, but it's definitely music. The core is remembering what it was like to make beautiful things. Captain Lisa Wright's ship was positioned at the edge of the formation, ready to evacuate the artistic fleet if the healing process went wrong. But as days passed, It became clear that the greatest risk wasn't violence from the Shadow Core. It was the emotional intensity of watching a traumatized cosmic entity slowly rediscover hope. "The crew is exhausted," Lisa reported to Jake, "not physically, but emotionally. We're all invested in this creature's recovery. When it struggles to create something and fails, we feel that failure. When it succeeds in making something beautiful, we celebrate like parents watching a child take their first steps." The breakthrough came in the third week, when the Shadow Core successfully created its first complex artistic expression. Using entire planets as materials, it sculpted a massive three-dimensional artwork that could only be seen from light away. The sculpture depicted the moment of creation itself, matter and energy, dancing together to form something beautiful out of nothing. "It remembers," Alina said with tears in her eyes as she watched the sensors record the cosmic sculpture. "It remembers what it was like before the trauma, before the darkness took away its ability to create." The core consciousness began communicating directly with the human fleet, using artistic expressions as language. It showed them images of its species' original civilization, beings of pure creative energy who had traveled between galaxies, seeding worlds with inspiration and beauty. There had been explorers and artists, sharing their gifts with younger species throughout the universe. The catastrophe that destroyed them had been cosmic in scale. A collision between galaxies had torn apart the fabric of space-time in their region, destroying not just their worlds but their fundamental ability to create. The survivors had been driven mad by the loss, transformed from creators into consumers of the very qualities they could no longer possess. "They've been trying to fill the void inside themselves by taking creativity from others," Amy explained to the assembled fleet commanders. "But consumption can never replace creation. The more they devoured, the emptier they became." As the healing process continued, shadow entities throughout the galaxy began to change. Reports came in from every sector of former shadow zones becoming bright again as the creatures reverted to their original nature. Worlds that had been shrouded in darkness for months suddenly blazed with new light as traumatized beings remembered how to create instead of destroy. Danny Wright led fighter patrols around the transformation zone, watching in amazement as space itself seemed to come alive with artistic expression. "The shadow creatures aren't destroying anymore," he reported. "They're building, creating structures that serve no purpose except to be beautiful." The process wasn't without setbacks. Some shadow entities were too damaged to fully recover, requiring ongoing therapeutic support from human combat artists. Others experienced relapses, temporarily returning to destructive behavior before the healing influence of the core consciousness brought them back to creative harmony. But gradually, steadily, the galaxy began to heal. The network of artistic expression that humanity had created as a weapon against the darkness evolved into a support system for cosmic recovery. Combat artists became therapeutic specialists, helping traumatized entities throughout the galaxy rediscover their ability to create. The war officially ended not with a surrender or a victory, but with the largest collaborative artwork in galactic history. The restored Shadow Core, now calling itself the Renewal Consciousness, worked with human artists and their alien allies to create a memorial spanning multiple star systems. The artwork honored both the victims of the Shadow War and the entities who had been transformed from creators into destroyers by cosmic trauma. "We did something unprecedented," Jake reflected as he stood on the observation deck of the Hope, watching artists from dozens of species work together on the memorial. "We didn't just defeat an enemy, we healed them. We proved that even the darkest trauma can be overcome with enough patience, creativity, and hope." The aftermath of the Shadow War reshaped galactic civilization. Humanity became known not as conquerors, or even defenders, but as healers who could paint hope into the hearts of any darkness. The Combat Arts program evolved into the Galactic Therapeutic Arts Exchange, an organization dedicated to using creative expression to resolve conflicts and heal psychological wounds on a cosmic scale. Amy Wright established the first interspecies creative academy on the world where shadow creatures had first retreated from a child's finger painting. Students from hundreds of species learned that art wasn't just decoration or entertainment, but a fundamental force capable of healing the universe itself. Dr. Rodriguez continued her research into the therapeutic applications of creativity, developing new techniques for cosmic-scale art therapy. Her work helped not just former shadow entities, but other traumatized species throughout the galaxy, who had suffered their own versions of creative destruction. Maya Chen retired from military service to become the first director of Universal Creative Healing, overseeing a network of artist-therapists who traveled between worlds, bringing hope to places where despair had taken root. Her combat artists became known as hope painters, warriors who fought battles against darkness with brushes and songs instead of weapons. Years later, Jake Morrison stood on the same observation deck where he had first conceived of weaponizing human creativity. But now, instead of watching preparations for war, he observed the daily miracle of galactic artistic collaboration. Former shadow entities worked alongside human artists, creating beauty that spanned star systems. The galaxy was brighter now, not just with the light of stars, but with the endless expressions of imagination that flowed between worlds like rivers of liquid hope. Children on 1,000 worlds grew up in a universe where the greatest threat had been transformed into the greatest source of inspiration. Captain Lisa Wright, now an admiral commanding the peaceful exploration fleet, often brought her grandchildren to visit the memorial systems where former enemies had become co-creators. Remember this, she would tell them as they watched cosmic sculptures dance between planets. This is what humans do best. We find hope in hopeless places and share it with anyone brave enough to pick up a brush and start painting. And across the galaxy, on worlds both ancient and newly born, that's exactly what they did. They painted hope in the heart of every darkness, proving that creativity was indeed the most powerful force in the universe.